Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Nothing Exempt. Today is another island show. We're going to talk about the island of Cyprus. I am Brian Piotr. I'm here with my co-host Nicholas Pardini, and this is another exciting show that I think has a lot more to talk about than previous islands, just because of how much history has been written on this island, and it has a very interesting current situation. So, Nick, why don't you start us off? What do you got for Cyprus?
Cyprus is an interesting island. I mean, geographically, it's part of the Middle East, but culturally, it's more part of Europe. Cyprus joined the European Union in 2004. And about 70% of the island is controlled by the Greek population, which is about 82%, somewhere between 70 to 80% of the population, whereas um, the 36% of the island. Actually, I was wrong about the first number. Let's say it's 59% is controlled by the Greek Cypriots. 36% is controlled by the self-declared Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus when Turkey had an invasion um, in the 1970s, and the remaining percent is a UN buffer zone and also the British military bases. I can't really pronounce these very well. Akatori and Delicalia. So that's kind of politically how it's suited up. And historically, it's been part of a lot of different empires, from the Assyrians, Phoenicians, the ancient Greeks under Alexander, Ptolemaic Egypt, ancient Rome, the Republic of Venice, the Byzantine Empire, um, and the Ottoman Empire,
Yeah,
and the British Empire.
if you look at where the island is geographically, it's just off the coast of Israel and Turkey. It's well, I mean, it's like this really strategic point between the east and the west, and so for all the western and eastern empires there have been, one of those strategic naval bases, resupply places, has been Cyprus. It's it's right there in the middle of it. So pretty much every major empire, east or west, has fought over Cyprus. It's got this long history. We're talking like way before written history. It was definitely being part of wars to dominate and control it. But since we have written history, you can read about things in the Bible, the Roman Empire, the Greek Empire, all those empires that Nick kept going with and listing, and it's filled with history. And then we get to today, and it's a split empire, or a split island. It's got the Republic of Cyprus trying to say they own the whole thing, and Turkey, a NATO member, invading it and trying to control the island and saying it's theirs. So it's still today being fought over.
Yeah, and really, since it's been so long, like the cultures and the economies of both sides of the islands are starting to diverge a little bit.
Yeah, so Nick, why don't you talk about that political event when Turkey did that? What happened?
Well, basically, kind of what happened was that um, it was originally part of the Ottoman Empire before the British took it, and then when the British granted them independence in 1960, there was violence between the Greeks and Turkish um, Cypriots, and their clashes that kept going. But in 1974, there was a coup staged by Greek Cypriot nationalists to create something similar to like the Greek military junta and potentially even unite Cyprus with the country of Greece. And Turkey reacted by invading Cyprus and capturing the present northern part of the country we mentioned, the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. Uh, it resulted in 150,000 Greek Cypriots and 50,000 Turkish Cypriots having to move to the other sides of the island, and the culture of the island balkanized. And those are pretty big moves when your total population back then was less than 1 million people on the island.
Yeah, and in this period, we're in the middle of the Cold War, and so the world split one side or the other, and here we have two teams on one side fighting each other over an island. Like there's both supposed to be on the western side of the wall, and here they are fighting over an island. So this was a big distraction that America really didn't need or want and couldn't control, and decided to just not really do much about. So the UN came in and said stop fighting, and that's basically where they left it, and that's where it is today.
Well, that's part of the reason why that Turkey is not in the being seriously considered for the European Union. There's other reasons why you can't be claiming the territory of another EU member like that and expect to be included in the club.
Right, and today we have 1 million people living there. It's a very diverse economy. This situation takes its toll on tourism, which could be much larger. If it
It
was,
already is a pretty large portion of the
it
city.
already is a large portion with lots of people going there for beautiful beaches and great vacations. But if there wasn't this going on with the divided island, just think of how much more they could have of that pie.
Yeah, and um, I think most of the tourism is probably just dominated the Greek section of the island. And the other thing that they were known for was like an international banking hub, particularly for depositors from Russia and the former Soviet Union. But then in 2014, basically Cyprus faced some financial problems, particularly in its banking system, because they invested a lot of their deposits in Greek government bonds, which were facing default. And so as a result, the EU took possession of the Cypriot banking system, put temporary capital controls on it because they're in the euro, and to prevent bank runs, they basically did a haircut on all deposits greater than the deposit insurance barometer. And a lot of people who had large deposits in Cypriot banks just had them wiped off the face of the map to recapitalize the bank.
Yeah, and that is something that has scared the Western world. Like, this is the only real place in the Western world that has done this, where it's a new threat to just capture your money in your bank account, say you can't do anything about it, we're taking this much money from you.
Well, yeah, it's called a bail-in. And this is like the politics of the bailout, such as TARP in the United States, 2008, was so messy and bad that people they don't want to have to do that again. And so the way that you recapitalize the banks without costing the taxpayer funds is that what you'd have to do is you have to bail, instead of bailing out, you bail in and you use the wealthier depositors as the collateral for the reformed bank.
But
And
it came with a hefty price tag when it comes to foreign investment, trust in their banks, the economy as a whole.
yeah,
So
Cyprus faced a depression as a result of this, and it's only really starting to recover in like the last year or two. And then also the other thing is, Cyprus stock market fell almost 99% from its peak because of this. It completely bombed out.
yeah, who cares how much money you can make if you have this fear that they're just going to take it all away from you if it's there?
Yeah, and the Europeans argued, the EU authorities argued on this. Oh, it's just a bunch of Russian oligarchs who have their money in there, and also that it's a small country, so we need to make an example out of them. That's what they did. They made it, since Cyprus is not systematically that huge of a risk. It's one of the smallest economies in the eurozone. It only has a GDP of $25 billion. That's less than the net worth of a lot of tech entrepreneurs in the United States, just by comparison. We can make a suitable example of them with their banking system, and so hopefully that scares other bigger countries like Italy and Spain and France to play ball with us, so that they don't have that happen to them.
And that's so far worked. Nobody brings that up as a possible solution to problems yet.
Well, no, bail-in is brought up as a solution to problems. That's why you've seen a lot of these governments in these countries, at least Italy, has, until very recently, has been holding its deficit targets. Not so much with the election of the populist there, but prior to that, it kept Italy from its government from getting out of bounds. It's also why you have negative interest rates in the ECB and all the easing that they do is because they're afraid of this as a potential risk of happening again. It's also why European banks. I'm not
I
doing the
mean,
stock
Nick,
advice here.
you're agreeing with me, Nick. I'm saying it was an effective
Yeah,
thing to do to stop other people from copying them.
yeah. It's also why European bank stocks to this day trade at very severe discounts to their North American and Asian rivals.
Yeah,
All across it.
this tiny country did have a huge effect for what it did. That one action did have a domino effect around the world as people saw it and realized the implications and changed the ways that they just like it. For such a small country, it really did have a large effect on the
Do you
world.
think that banking bail-in is the most significant thing in history to ever happen in Cyprus, or is it the Turkish controversy?
I don't know if either of those is the most significant thing that's ever happened on Cyprus. I wasn't around in the 70s to see how it affected people, but I imagine it had a smaller effect than the banking crisis did, just because of the way the information can travel.
Well, I think I mean, I'm talking about not for. I mean, for Cyprus, the Cypriots themselves.
Oh,
Oh, it was definitely the Turkish invasion and all the empires that have fought over it over the years. But in terms of like what it means for the outside world, I definitely think it's the banking thing because that says a
uh,
lot. That really shaped the core confidence of the global financial system.
no, I agree with that. So let's move and talk about the actual island itself. You know, it we talked a little bit about its population and the way it's divided up, but um, what makes the islands a place to want to go visit today? Like, what would you like to see if you went there, Nick?
It's got nice beaches there, um, and it's got a lot of history from ancient Greek times and from medieval times as well. Um, it's kind of like a more. I mean, it economic. I don't really know that much about like how the economy runs there, or how there's a banking system, but it does have like apparently a more prosperous society than its parent country, Greece. And yeah, it's supposed to have a lot of nice beaches and warm weather and things like that. I mean, it's a place that's on my periphery of places to visit, but it's not like a top priority.
If I was going to go on a tour of the Mediterranean and look at ancient history, it would definitely make the list of places I would want to see. Cyprus has thousand-year-old churches. Older than that, it's got 1,500-year-old churches. It's got uh, temples to Apollo that are in ruins and castles from the Byzantines. There's so many archaeological sites to go and see on the island. Um, and on top of it, it's an island in the Mediterranean that's a good vacation destination, so you can do two things at once. You can see history, you can see some old churches, some cool sites that most people don't see, and you get to have you know, a vacation at the same time that's semi-arid and not tropical, but at least very nice.
I mean, the climate there is very similar to other parts of that area, such as Turkey. And I went to the beaches in Turkey. They're actually very nice. Um, Same with Greece, and Greece has a lot of history too. And Malta, which is a little bit further away, but it's kind of like a Catholic version of. It's like a smaller, more Catholic version of Cyprus in a way. Um,
Yeah, well, I can tell you if you're curious, the average high in August is 81 to 82 degrees F, and the middle blah blah blah. At the average high for the year is around 91. So it's not that hot. It's tempered by the ocean quite a bit.
Yeah. I mean, it's the kind of, well, actually, it gets a lot hotter than that in Turkey, on the coast of Turkey. It was in the 90s when I was there. So maybe it is a little cooler, maybe because it's an island.
No,
Um,
it says in the highlands it can get up to 95. So, 4 degrees different between the coast of the island and the center highlands of the island. So it is a mountainous island. It's not got a lot of agriculture. It does have limited water supplies. It's always a problem, a hot topic to talk about water supply on the island, especially between north and south, and building dams and desalination plants. And yeah, it's not a it is semi-arid, like I said, so it's not an agricultural island like you can see other places in the
well,
world.
it's very convenient, too, just for visitors because since it was a British colony for over 60 years, um, it there's a lot of fluency in English on the island from both the Greek and the Turkish populations. And they use the euro, so it's not that complicated for currency wise either. They do drive on the left too, and people are very aggressive in driving, just like in Malta.
Yeah, so they happened to be under the British when cars came around. That
Yeah.
that's one of the many places in the world that drives on the left because at that time that's what happened. The
So
the darn British. Everybody drives on the left around the world just because of them.
yeah, and I think you get very reasonable flights from London and other parts of Europe to get there if you want to visit. Um, I mean, I think it's definitely on my list for Cyprus. I mean, there's a lot of other Mediterranean islands that I've been to in the past, and I would like to go to as well. I mean, I eventually will do shows on Majorca and Malta, which are the two Mediterranean islands I've had the chance to really visit. But other ones I'd like to see include um, Minorca in Spain, Corsica, Sardinia and Sicily in Italy, and yeah, maybe some of the Greek islands in Cyprus.
Yeah, I'm sure everybody who's listening agrees with you, Nick. Like, it would be so cool to be able to have a yacht and make a slow tour around the Mediterranean and visit all the islands of the Mediterranean in a summer for like 3 months.
Yeah,
That would be one of those fantasy trips that I'm sure very few, if any, people are gonna ever get to take. But I would put one of those trips up there in like my top 10, like
yeah.
lifelong goal trips.
I've met a few people I know whose families are really into sailing, who've done it, and they just take a summer and sail on like rent a sailboat and go all around. It sounds like fun.
I'm not into open ocean sailing. Like Mediterranean's on a rather large yacht. I could do, but
Well, yeah, I mean the ancient Romans, that's why they never went into the Atlantic. They're so the Mediterranean was tough enough for those guys. So like imagine them trying to like go in a real open ocean.
no, I have no interest in doing that with like a 50-foot sailboat traveling around the actual open ocean in the world and dealing with like 40-foot waves occasionally.
I mean, how are there waves in the open ocean unless if there's a storm? Like, when if assuming it's not like a nasty storm out in the middle of the ocean, like how choppy does the water actually get?
Nick, it's always storm related.
Yeah, but like
But if you're in a
waves on a
sailboat, you're
coast
not
make
gonna.
sense because it's hitting the land, and so yeah. But I thought the ocean would be more calm out in the open ocean unless if there's
You're
definitely
talking
a
like Nick,
storm.
they're the world's mostly water. There are areas uh, along the equator that are very still most of the time, and then there's places like the Cape of Good Hope and the Southern Oceans where there's no land to stop the water and this polar vortex that creates storms that you can have 10-story waves. Like there's videos of container ships going around the Horn of Africa with the waves coming up to the height of the bridge and just like terrifying. In some of the biggest ships on Earth still being terrified with waves hitting the windows on the bridge 10 or 8 or 10 stories up there. You can have some crazy storms that I would not want anything to do with in the little sailboat.
Yeah.
But there's
What do you
whole
think about these
sections.
like teenagers? You always hear about like these teenagers or like preteen kids who like every few years who break the world record for the youngest person to sail around the world by themselves. I mean, as a parent, how do you feel about that?
No thanks. There's been plenty of people who have died going around the world by themselves.
I mean, I don't even want to do that at 30.
No,
Uh,
I don't really want to do that either.
I'm like, hell, I see this
You know,
13-year-old.
the world's not a terrifying place, and there's sections where you can go and not and like avoid storms and have good technology and see that there's a storm and go into a port, and there's completely safe, below average, fun trips you can do on a sailboat. But around the world is not one of them for me.
Yeah, but the probability if you're going around the world and in a consecutive time of hitting at least one storm is pretty high.
Every time you're trying to cross those continents, getting from unless you're going to go through the Panama Canal, like if you're going to be legit and you're going to go around the sea, like what they call that, the bottom of
Cape
South
Horn.
America,
Cape
Cape
Horn.
Horn. Yeah, I don't want to do that.
So,
Your probability is very high there.
well, Cape Horn is one of the most dangerous in the Strait of Magellan, or one of the most dangerous places in the world to sail a boat.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and there's very few options about avoiding those.
I do want to go on a cruise ship to Antarctica, and I do take off through there. But that's a little different when you're on a giant cruise ship.
Yeah, a cruise ship in the Mediterranean or the around the Bahamas or going to Hawaii. There's
No,
lots
but I'm
of
talking about Cape Horn.
no, there's no cruise ships going around there.
Yeah, I guess there are. If you want to go to Antarctica, you leave from Tierra del Fuego and you go across Cape Horn to go to the Antarctic Peninsula.
But I don't think those are cruise ships, Nick. Those are called explorer ships, explorer class ships. They're
No,
not cruise ships.
they are cruise ships. They're just a little slightly smaller than a regular cruise ship, but they are still like
Their hull is different. Their size is different. Everything on board is different. It's not a cruise ship. But
yeah.
those trips do sound like fun to go places that you just can't go. You can't fly there and have that experience.
Well, yeah. I mean, the places I want to do cruises are places that it's not convenient to just get on a plane or drive and explore it yourself. Like the Panama Canal is a perfect example of that. The whole experience is being in the canal on a boat. And I did that when I was in college. It's a fun trip. Antarctica is in that category too, and Alaska, because you can't go and see Glacier Bay National Park. You can't drive there. You have to take a boat to watch the glaciers crack. Uh, those are like the type of places I'd like to go for cruises. Um, Caribbean also kind of makes some sense just because flying from island to island to island doesn't always it's not the most practical thing to do. But at the same time, a Caribbean vacation, sometimes you just want to just go on one island and stay there for a while.
Yeah, I think we've had this conversation before, but I would always prefer a small boat like for that kind of cruise in the Mediterranean so that it's not like you have 4 hours and everybody on the island knows that a cruise ship's in town and they change all their prices and you don't have the time to go do anything to see anything like it's kind of ruined by the large cruise ship aspect of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to roll up on a yacht, get a mooring, stay like 3 days, 4 days, go see a tiny island off of Greece or Cyprus or Malta or Majorca, and then get back on my boat.
Yeah, have you ever been on a cruise?
No, I've never been on a cruise ship.
They're fun. Um,
Yeah,
and
I think being on the boat, that portion of it is more fun to have. You go get dessert or breakfast at any time of the day, and it doesn't matter. You just go like that type of
you want it to
being.
be big enough to have all the amenities, but not too big that it's like Disneyland on a boat.
Yeah, and if I want to see where I'm going, I would rather it be a tiny little boat that I'm taking myself. If I want to go for the experience of the boat, like the Panama Canal, where I'm not going to get off, that would be a great cruise.
Yeah. The other thing is, when it comes to cruises, a lot of these cruise lines offer these cruises to nowhere, especially like in New York, where you get on a cruise on a Friday, you just sail out in the middle of the ocean and hang out on the boat, and then you come back on Sunday.
Is that partly to do like legally gamble or something?
Well, yeah, international waters,
So
you
like,
can.
is that the reason for the season? Like that's why you're going out on the boat is you can't gamble until you get 10 miles off the coast or something.
Well, that's part of it, but also I think the main reason is that people just want the experience on the ship. And in New York, there's not that many stops that are nearby that you can do a short trip to. I mean, I guess you could go to Cape Cod or to Martha's Vineyard or to like the Carolinas.
What's the legal reason for every single cruise leaving California stopping in Ensenada?
Well, you need to have at least one international stop for a few reasons. One, I think it has to do with the gambling a little bit, but I think the most important thing is tax reasons for it and Jones Act reasons for it. So that you can pay like a crew from like Indonesia or the Philippines or one of these low cost countries and pay them below minimum wage.
So you have a home port outside of the U.S. So technically, like that cruise ship is based in Ensenada with a
Well,
stop in America, and you can have below minimum wage cruise
well, no,
through.
they're based in all the cruise ships are like based in like Liberia or like the Solomon Islands. There's these random little tax advantaged countries for cruise ships. The thing is though, to prevent Jones Act issues, you have to have at least one non-American stop. So even all the Alaska cruises stop in Vancouver.
What's the Jones Act related to cruise ships? Like
You have
any
to
Jones
hire for any boat. You have to hire American crew and an American-made boat.
that goes between U.S. cities?
Yeah.
Okay, so if your cruise ship went from an American city to any foreign city, you don't need any of this stopping. But if you're trying to go between two American cities, you need to stop in a foreign city so that you can, between two American ports, like you're going to Hawaii or Alaska, you need to stop in a foreign port so that you can have a non-Jones Act flagged vessel and crew.
Yeah, but there are the thing is that I need to be 100% clear on this, but um, yeah, I mean, when it comes to the Jones Act, though, that's also, and there are some exceptions. Like, there are Hawaiian cruises where people don't stop at a foreign place. Or do they? Do they stop in Ensenada, too, for Hawaiian cruises from San Diego or LA?
When I've looked, they all stop in Ensenada. Like every cruise that leaves from LA stops in Ensenada.
Alright, so I guess they do then. So, yeah. Yeah, it has to be Jones Act.
Yeah, and so that's annoying. Like we have a legal we have a law from 100 years ago that's still affecting daily travel today.
Well, the Jones Act messes a lot of things up, generally. We could do a whole podcast probably on the Jones Act. But the Jones Act is also why it costs so much stuff to import stuff from Hawaii. And
Yeah,
also,
and they also can't stop at Hawaii on the way. Like you can't go from China to Hawaii to LAX because that trip from Hawaii to LAX has to be an American ship.
oh no, yeah, you can.
No, you can't
Oh
stop.
yeah.
You can't
But you
stop. You
can't
can't.
change ships. You can't change ships. That's what you can't do.
You
It's the
can't.
same
You
ship.
can't transport goods between U.S. ports unless the boat was made and flagged in America.
Oh yeah, and an American crew, which
And
means union labor.
so
And
that means they just don't stop in Hawaii, and that's why fuel and goods and supplies all go to L.A. first, and then go on another boat back to Hawaii.
and then Puerto Rico. It's also why they're not competitive economically because Jones Act makes you can't ship stuff directly from Florida to Puerto Rico, or if you do, it's very expensive.
Yeah, and then once it's there, you can't. Your minimum wage laws in the U.S. make them cost uncompetitive with all the islands around them. So hotels cost more, everything costs more in Puerto Rico because of American laws, the Jones Act, minimum wage.
Yeah,
Probably.
but we've had enough shows. We've done 2 or 3 shows, I think, on Puerto Rico already. That's why I'm trying to avoid it for an island show because we've gone on and on and on about them and their finances.
And not, I mean, not just them. Like, so I think American Samoa used to can fish. There used to be a bunch of canneries on there, and then Obama passed the minimum wage law that affected all U.S. territories, and they shut down all the canneries on Samoa.
Yeah, they just moved them to Samoa next door versus American Samoa.
Yeah, so if you have to pay minimum wages, all of a sudden all the employment on the island is no longer of competitive, and it all gets shut down.
So yeah, that explains why there's always a foreign stop on a cruise because thanks to the Jones Act. I mean, why can't why can't Trump or like the Congress now repeal the Jones Act? I mean, there were talks about it during the Puerto Rico crisis, but it seems like it's a law that all it does is it's like uncompetitive protectionist. I guess that's why Trump probably supports the Jones Act. Now that I think about it,
The people who benefit from it are shipbuilders in the U.S. If they got rid of the Jones Act, those many of those shipbuilders would go out of business.
but also it's the unionized crews too that benefit from it.
You're right. The labor that runs the ships and builds the ships, those people, those voters, would would be out of work.
How many of those voters are in red states?
Not very many, because I mean, how many shipbuilding areas are there in the country that aren't in blue northeastern or western ports?
There might be a few southern states, and maybe Texas,
I
but
I know there's got to be some along the coast, the Gulf Coast, but it's mostly blue. Like most of that labor is in blue states, so I don't know why they care.
I mean, I think repealing the Jones Act would be a very good law for the country. It wouldn't cost it wouldn't cost the U.S. a dime either, and be a real economic stimulus.
And on top of that, there's a lot of oil that is not drilled in Alaska because its cost to transport it from Alaska is so much higher because of the Jones Act.
Oh yeah, that too. Like that's why Alaska is probably very expensive, given how remote and how rural it is.
And it's got some of the most expensive gasoline in the country, even though they get it from the ground there.
There's no refineries in
There's
Alaska.
no refinery, so you need a Jones Act vessel to take oil down the coast and then back up the coast with refined gas.
Why is there no oil refinery in Alaska?
Well, we haven't built oil refineries in the country since the 70s.
But wouldn't they built one in Alaska during that whole period?
They haven't. I mean, Alaska's got a tiny population. I imagine that the business case didn't make sense back the last time you were allowed to build one. And maybe it still doesn't. A refinery is an expensive
Well, also,
piece of
exports were
infrastructure.
legal for a long time, but now exports legal, and Alaska having a slightly bigger population, wouldn't it make sense for them to build a refinery?
Well, if they were legally allowed to, maybe it would be. But you haven't been allowed to build a refinery in my lifetime.
Yeah. I think we got really off
No,
topic
we
here.
do this all the time, and it's fine. It's the point of this show. It's nothing exempt. We're going to go there.
it was Cyprus, and then we're talking about the Jones Act and oil refineries in Alaska.
Okay, I'm gonna throw in one fact about Cyprus, and then I'm done for the show.
Okay.
The largest groups of foreign residents has quite a few groups that were a little surprising to me. So obviously the Greeks, these are expats. Greeks, UK members, but then Romanians are third at 23,000 people in Cyprus from Romania. And then the Philippines are surprising there with almost 10,000 Philippines citizens and Philippinians. How do you say
Filipinos.
Filipinos?
No.
And then Sri Lankans and Vietnamese. I didn't expect those groups to show up as far as large expat groups.
Well,
Like
maybe they're cruise ship crews or related to it.
that could be that makes sense. Like why else are there 7,000 people from Sri Lanka and Cyprus?
Because I know with the Philippines, like they are known for having a lot of they're a labor exporting country. They have, and it's not just unskilled labor. Like they have a lot of skilled labor exporting too, such as like nurses and dentists and doctors and things. Like it's very common, at least in California, to find Filipino dentists. Like two of my last three dentists were Filipino descent. Um, but that's a little bit off topic. But yeah, so like yeah, they generally are labor exporting countries, so it's not surprising to see big Filipino communities all around the world in terms of expatriates, because there's just more job opportunities for them off their islands, especially higher paying ones.
Okay. Well, hey guys, if you're still listening to us, we'd love to get your feedback on the show and see what you liked and didn't like. You can reach out to us at Nothing Exempt on both Twitter and Reddit, and we'll get back to you pretty quick. And if you have any suggestions for future islands or shows, that's the right place to give it to us. And if you still haven't done it, we'd appreciate it if you give us a review on iTunes to let more people know about the show. And that's all I have for today, Nick. Why don't you close us out?
Yeah, this was a good island show. If you have any suggestions for future islands, I think the next one we're going to do though is Barbados, which I think will be a good island show. We're going to go from one side of the Atlantic to the other, and yeah, that concludes it for today.